Hello, everybody. I'm back with Dr. Avivi, and we're wrapping up our topic on family dynamics in the workplace. So, the first week we talked about the different family roles that can manifest. The week after that, we did a deep dive around transference and how old emotional patterns can get re-triggered by similar situations in work. And today we're going to do what everybody wants to know about: is what do you actually do with all this information? What do you actually do about it? How do you make your workplace better, either as a leader or as an employee? So, Adi, do you want to kick us off?
Yeah, so I think once you figured it out that what's happening here is an old family role and transferential issues are what creating some kind of disturbance or problem at work, you kind of like weeded out other options. This isn't an ongoing personality clash between people or somebody being a really difficult person to get along with. If you see a reaction that's very intense and prolonged, and you are convinced that this is not, because sometimes we might not know why someone else reacts, and we might think, oh, this is transference. Their old stuff is coming up. But if they have a minority status, if this is maybe a woman or a person of color, we might not see something that is actually happening that could be very adversarial to them. So figure out that it is what it is, that really somebody is just lit up, or you are lit up because the old things are coming up. Then you got to ask yourself, what are my priorities? So in any situation, DBT, which is a form of treatment, has this really neat little trick to ask yourself, what's important for me now? Maybe I am flooded with something because somebody kind of touched on an old pattern of mine, or maybe I'm suspecting that I touched on an old pattern of theirs, maybe because of how they're reacting, kind of objectively, whatever that means. They have an intense and prolonged reaction to something that looks mundane, and maybe I established it is, or I noticed myself being in that position. Okay, what do I want to achieve now that I know that this is what's going on? So the three options are: you might have a task at hand, a particular objective for yourself as an employee or for your team as an employer, and you want it done. And if that's what's important for you, then you need to prioritize that in how you approach the situation. The other option is maybe the relationship is what's important to you. And in these cases, I would lean toward that. So regardless of, we're going to talk about all three, if it's really transferential issue, then there is a relationship issue, and you might want to lean on that. So pay attention to that. Can I have as good of a relationship with this person, or maybe even better, if I approach this situation? And the last thing, this could be and might be a self-esteem issue. And I'm using self-esteem in the DBT way. That is, do I need to assert my authority here? Or do I need to stand up for myself? Did something come up for me that's transferential, like I'm responding to someone as if they're an old figure? And it's very important for me to portray that, to resolve that in a way that establishes something for me about myself. So either there is an objective that's important to reach, a relationship that's important to maintain, or some kind of a self-esteem issue. Usually all three are important. Pay attention to the relationship. And once you really establish what are my priorities, they're all important, but which one is one, which one is two, and which one is three, go ahead and approach the topic with the other individual. And I'm going to let Mark talk about it a little bit. Like, okay, now I know what I want to achieve. How do I achieve it?
Yeah, totally. I think that's a really great framework to lay out. And just want to reiterate what you said is typically with these issues, it's the second one. It's about preserving the relationship. And for some organizational cultures, that might be a little bit new, right? That might be a little bit different. It means that the focus has to move away from priority or from performance and more into creating a cohesive culture. And I'll tell you from the companies that I've worked with, that is something that is invaluable, right? And for those of you out there that are focused on production and profit only, the idea is that retaining employees and having better employee satisfaction actually is the number one thing to increase those metrics, right? You don't spend money retraining new people. You don't have to go through hiring and firing. You have people that are willing to actually go that extra mile or focus more at work, because at the end of the day, they just enjoy working there. They feel safe. They feel understood. They feel like their boss is on their side. They feel their teammates, care about them. All that stuff is really, really important. And some of those soft skills that you probably heard about that make a workplace way more attractive, especially to current and new hires.
Right. And that's a delicate balance because you both want to acknowledge it and invite communication, but you also don't want to make the other person feel exposed. It could be very humiliating for someone if you point out their family stuff in the workplace. So I know you're going to touch on how to do it delicately.
Yeah, exactly. And I think, it's going to be a long series we're going to do. I can see it can be like multiple weeks. We will dive into culture and different organizational cultures, and this would be, a little teaser for that, right? You can, if you want a culture that's warm, that's inviting, and that actually has some emotional depth, then pay attention to this next part, because this can be one thing to help you to model it. So the first thing, and this is a skill that's really important to work on as any kind of leader, is to lead with curiosity, right? And so much of the time, we want to lead with questioning that gets towards an agenda, right? Like, what are you going to do to fix this? How has this impacted your work? Like the questions that have that kind of like secret agenda of, hey, how you get back on the horse? That stuff can be motivating, but for someone that is in an emotional spot, those questions can feel very aggressive and they can actually feel very demeaning. So some curiosity questions would be something like, hey, like, how are you feeling right now? Or how was your past week? Or, hey, I saw that thing that happened, last week. How did you sleep that night? Did you take any of work home with you? What was going on for you? Did you have any thoughts? Did you have any feelings? Things like, has anything like this happened before in your life? That's how you start to figure out if it's transference, or just remind you of something that seems hard for you. You want to say it with a gentle tone, and you want to try to convey this idea of concern and care. And what's also really important, this will be difficult for some leaders, and it was difficult for me, is give them time to answer, right? Give them like a lot of time, more time than you think. Because when someone, and you've probably experienced this, right? We're all human. When you're having an emotion, the kind of wiring gets scrambled. And it can be really difficult to come up with an answer or to be clear or to be concise. They might be talking in kind of half sentences, might be looking at the ground. They might be, mumbling. And just give them some time to fully answer the question and just be with them, right? Like make gentle eye contact, right? Like just show them that you're there and available and you're giving them all the time they need to really try to work through some of this. So leading with curiosity is one.
Yeah, I think the curiosity can also start with a very short and very, very warm description. Hey, I noticed da-da-da-da-da, and give a very clear behavior, like that you're less active in group meetings, that you and I haven't met our 3 meetings a week as usual. Kind of like, what did you notice that made you, and it got me worried, and then ask this question. Invite the person to a conversation where you both agree that something is happening.
Right, exactly. And I like this idea of concern, of saying, I'm worried, I'm here for you, I want to support you in this. Because again, and this depends on your culture, some people might, if your culture is particularly toxic, which, it happens, so you might see these conversations as leading up to being fired, right? Of like, here's something wrong with you, or, you're doing something bad. So really come with that supportive tone and that idea of like, I have your back, I'm just interested, right? Just simply interested in what's going on. So the other thing that Adi talked about, I just want to re-highlight here, is don't name transference directly. That's really, really rude. I'll tell you, it gets me in trouble in my relationships all the time. Of saying like, hey, this is probably your mom stuff, isn't it? Turns out, people hate that. People hate that, especially if you're right? So what the idea is, you can lead them to that by asking some questions like, hey, has this happened before? Does it remind you of another situation? But then stop there, right? Most of you leaders are not trained therapists, not mental health counselors, not coaches. So I would just go a little bit forward into, hey, what does it remind you of? And then stop. There's no need to do deeper work, even though you may have this idea that it relates to a parental figure or a sibling or, a time they were bullied or whatever. And then the next one, and this is back to that culture thing, is modeling some self-disclosure. So obviously if you're in a leadership role, or if your culture doesn't really support this, you don't want to be too dramatic. Maybe not dramatic is probably the wrong word. I guess too vulnerable. And the way to know that is if you're sharing something where the focus of the conversation shifts to you, where your employee starts wanting to take care of you or start worrying about you. If you're sharing some trauma that's like awful, and your employee's like, oh my God, like I just want to, like I can't believe that happened to you. That's a little bit too much, right? It's too intense because it overrides the conversation.
It's like a tiny self-disclosure. A tiny self-disclosure at this point. It's like saying, some of my stuff came up, when you da-da-da-da-da, it kind of brought me back to a time where this was the norm of treating me, or it kind of put me in this younger state of me having to fight for attention, or me fearing criticism, kind of not even tell the person like what's the actual content, just a little bit of self-disclosure of what's your position here. I think it's what I would mean by self-disclosure.
Right, exactly. And it gives them the permission to think outside the box a little bit, and also moves the focus away from the actual incident and more to the pattern, which is what we're trying to do when we are acknowledging this family dynamics, right? It's more to the role, more to the pattern, more to the perspective, and less to like the one thing that happened, right? And the very last thing is to follow up, right? So after these conversations, especially, they can sometimes get quite emotional. Your employee or your team member might, have some tears. They might feel ashamed. They might feel very relieved, very connected with you. After something that's an emotional connection, you want to follow up with them a couple days after, maybe even a week after, a couple times, and be like, hey, that conversation we had on Thursday, I know we got a little bit deeper, we got a little bit closer together, we learned some things about each other, like, what was that like for you? How's that going? How might that change our relationship moving forward, or does it? So I think really finding ways to hold that emotional intensity while acknowledging that it was in service of the work, which actually leads to the actual last one. Oh, you want to talk about that one?
No, I just wanted to add that I think one thing that ties it up back to the work, because you want to end the therapy session with like a little bit of a repair of whatever was damaged and go back to work. So you might also share what's important to you here, like those 3 priorities. It's so important for me that we work on this project together. So I want to resolve this, or the relationship that you and I have, how we bounce ideas from each other, and that kind of warmness that we share, it's valuable for me. It's making work more pleasant, more effective for me. I want to restore that. Or it's so important for me that my leadership position would be respected, and that I feel that my authority is something that the team sees. So I really want to resolve this with you. Just maybe invite them, recruit them into your goal in this conversation. Could be a way to move forward with this.
Yeah.
And then get back to work. Do something that's work related.
Yeah, something that's work related, something that's easy, something that the person feels confident doing. Some of those like, kind of standard tasks, not a big project, not something like that. Just like, hey, and then now let's move back to this. Which gives the mind something to latch onto and lets them go back to something that's familiar, that's confidence building, that makes them feel powerful and competent, like we talked about before, and let them kind of move back into that emotional space.
Yeah, I think one thing is we talked a little bit more from the perspective of a boss, somebody with authority. If it is a peer or employee, you can coax it in like your desire to collaborate, or your desire to do right by the company or by your boss. Let them know that that's important to you, so that the invitation would be to get to an end result that's beneficial for the other person as well. And so you can move away from that idea that this person is responsible for the triggered emotion, for the transfers coming up, to we had a difficult moment and we both are on the same side. It could be a very reparative process and discussion. And I want to say that if this is a repeating occurrence for you, you respond very intensely, very strongly to others, and you keep, now that you know about transference, you're like, oh my God, my transference is really playing a role in my therapy, or find an executive coach. It might be really, really useful for you to do that and to do a little bit of a deeper work. If this is happening once in a blue moon, we're human beings. It's part of our psychology. If this is how it is for you, either with bosses or with peers or with employees, so get to know more about yourself and the skills to cope with it in a way that doesn't damage your work environment, making it harder. This concludes our little series about this. I will say that we mentioned DBT in the beginning here, and those 3 priorities, they do have particular DBT skills that come with them, like how do I go about it when I want to prioritize either my objective, my relationship, or my self-esteem. And both Mark and I are well trained in that. So if there's an interest, we're happy to do another. Let us know. We'll be really happy to do one of those.
Yeah, totally. Just let us know in the comments if it's something that's relevant to you. And we'll see you all in a couple of weeks. Take care, everybody. Bye.